see so many folks interested in pollinators. Thank you all for coming. Yeah, like she said, our pollinators are in decline, and they are so important. And a lot of people aren't aware of that and why they're important. Just to start with, a pollinator is any animal, usually insects, but also birds and bats, that transfer the pollen from one flower to another flower and pollinate it, which is how they reproduce. The flowers get the benefit of reproducing, and the pollinators are rewarded with the pollen and the nectar. So it's a mutual relationship. Some examples are bees, butterflies, moths, hummingbirds, beetles. We don't always think about the beetles. Flies, including fruit flies, and bats. Now in this region, our bats are good for eating insects, which is, that's their major contribution to us in this area. They eat the insects that give us diseases, but out west and down in the tropics, they are major pollinators. One of the main reasons for their decline is habitat loss, habitat conversion, say to farmland, and habitat degradation, and also fragmentation. I am horrified to say that on my way here from Richwood to come here to give the presentation yesterday, I killed my first monarch on my windshield on the interstate. It killed me. Just, going 70 on the interstate. How ironic. The other main reason is pesticide use, industrial uses, and residential. This shows a farm. They apply by plane, by tractor, by hand, and you can see this is the type of application that I think is the most damaging. It's just aerial, and it just kind of goes everywhere. Down in the corner is, I took these pictures at Walmart. Anybody can walk in and buy any kind of poison you want and apply as much as you want, however you want, whenever you want, and that's not good, because, little tangent here, as a federal employee and also state employees, if we apply herbicide, we have to be certified. We have to go through classes, and the only way we can do it on our jobs is to be certified. But if I'm off the clock, and any of us in this room, anybody can walk into Lowe's, Walmart, Home Depot, buy Roundup or any other pesticide and just go crazy. The good thing about the certification, you do learn, how to properly do it, the ways to prevent, non-target spraying and things like that. They always preach read the label, but how many of us do read the label? Even in urban settings where you think, well, there probably aren't that many trees and flowers, there's still major damage done. Just a few weeks ago, I watched a webinar, and they had this example in here. This is it's kind of small, and my pointer's not going to show on the screen. But that single tree right above the parking lot, they sprayed that, and the next day, I don't know, can you see all these little black dots? Those are all bumblebees. And that's, you'd think, well, not that much damage, but it is. Okay, I'm a visual person, and this really sends it home to me. This is the estimated agricultural use of imidacloprid, which is one of the most used and most studied herbicides, which also happens to be a neonicotinoid, which I'll talk about next. That's a class of pesticides that is doing the most damage to our pollinators. So this is the use in 1994, 1999, 2004, and 2010. That's one of the major reasons our pollinators are in decline. And as I mentioned, this imidacloprid is in a class called neonicotinoids, or neonics. They abbreviate it neonics. And what's so horrible about those, I don't know if you can see how well you can see this diagram, but they've got a little skull and crossbones on this little seed because it's been treated with a neonic. And neonics are systemic, which means it goes throughout the entire plant, including the leaves, the pollen, the nectar, the entire thing. So as it's growing, the red shows the pesticide. The bee, butterfly, whatever, goes to the flower, feeds on the pollen, or the nectar, collects the pollen, and it's going to die because the nectar and pollen are poisoned. Some pesticides systemic pesticides will just like disorient the bees, and they can't find their way back to their hives or their nests. These neonics, it's neurological, it paralyzes them and they die. Some unintended or indirect effects of pesticides, like I mentioned, spray drift, like on the next slide. Spray drift, when you just, you spray it in the air, one of the things in the certification classes, what's the wind speed? How far is that mist gonna go where you don't want it to go? How big are the droplets of that herbicide you're spraying? All kinds of things, and you can adjust your nozzle so the drops are different sizes, and all kinds of things you can do to reduce drift. But that spray drift into non-target areas, you can end up killing your neighbor's flowers, for instance. Seed dust dislodgement, like I was saying, those seeds are coated with that dust, and on these big farms or industrial farms, they've got truckloads, and they're going to truck it to the farms to be planted, and along the way you're hitting these bumps, and that dust is dislodging along the way, which will cause soil contamination, which will leach into the ground and poison bees nesting underground, also poisoning the food supply of birds. I'm not going to get into the whole GMO, genetically modified crops, the issue of whether or not they're safe to eat. That's a big thing. But what I can say is very bad about GMO crops is they are, as the name suggests, genetically modified. Not only do they change the genetics to, say, make an ear of corn bigger, greater production, maybe more ears on the stalk, things like that. But the bad thing is they also, and this was probably, what happened was probably unintended, but they have made them genetically immune to herbicides. They call it Roundup Ready corn. You may have heard of Roundup Ready corn or soybeans. So they're resistant to Roundup. So they just fly the whole farm just spraying this Roundup, which kills everything. Everything except these crops that are immune because they're genetically made so. Now the bad thing about that is all of those, those weeds that were growing, between the rows of corn and soybeans, those used to sustain our pollinators, and now they're gone. That's, you know, that's habitat loss right there. Those pollen sources and nectar sources are now gone. And the monarch butterfly, 70% of that population used to be sustained on agricultural milkweed. 70%, and now, you know, that's gone. Mostly out west where all the farms are, but 70% of the population used to be sustained on that monarch, and now it's gone because it's sprayed. Other reasons for decline are parasites. This is a mite on some bee larvae, and a parasitoid wasp emerging from an unfortunate monarch caterpillar. The parasitoid wasps lay their eggs inside the caterpillars, and they don't kill them by doing that, but when the wasp grows, it eventually comes out, and it basically eats the caterpillar from inside out and then comes out, so it does kill the caterpillar eventually. There are also non-native diseases, competition. Here we have a honeybee person in here. I don't mean any offense. Don't take offense, I'm not dissing honeybees. But honeybees are non-native, and our native bumblebees, they're adapted to the native flowers, so it's a competition thing. Honeybees are good too. And climate change, and they've actually, not too much has been studied yet on the effects of climate change on various animals, but they have done some studies on the bumblebees. And climate change for anything is going to force them, say the pollinators, force them to move as the flowers are adapted to certain climates, and as the climate disappears, say down south, they're going to move up north. If the plants are dying out down south, the pollinators have to move up north to find those floral resources that they need. So they're going to have to move. And the bumblebees are showing a lack of movement. This is kind of small, but here on the left are the bumblebees, and here this green patch is all the other pollinators, butterflies, and the like. Normal temperature, and then as the temperature starts to rise, these other pollinators are moving north, but the bumblebees are not. They're not moving north, and they're disappearing down south, so they're sort of in a vice. And they're also sort of being isolated in islands. Topographically, as the climate warms, they're being driven, up and just, isolated into little patches. They are important because they are a keystone group, which means that basically everything under them depends on them. If they disappear, everything else disappears or is severely affected. And no, we don't have pollinators, we don't have food. A third of what we eat depends on pollinators. And 85% of plants could not produce fruit or seeds without them. Examples: apples, oranges, blueberries, raspberries, cherries, pumpkins, pears, vanilla, coffee, and chocolate. Most importantly, chocolate. And also, alfalfa, sugar beets, carrots, onions, asparagus, broccoli. I mean, the list goes on. There are 150 food crops in the U.S. that depend on them. I've seen different statistics, but pollinators are responsible for $18 to $27 billion a year in U.S. food crops. and contribute 24 to 57 billion a year in pollination services and 168 billion a year worldwide. And pollinator services, like I said, crop production, natural pest control. There are pollinators that will eat your, the insects that are, attacking your crops that you want to go away, you want to spray and get rid of. There are insects that will do that for you. Like the parasitoid wasps, ladybugs, lacewings, they devour predators, your, aphids and things like that eat your crops. If you can get enough of these natural predators, you don't have to use herbicides. But we're killing them along with the others. But natural pest control does work, and not only are you reducing your use of pesticides. If you don't have to spray. Honey production is another value. These are all services, ecological services. I mean, wildlife support, I don't think you can put a number on that. I mean, we depend on these pollinators for food, and all the wildlife out there depends on them. And we, in part, depend on the wildlife, and I don't know how you even put a number on that. And indirect value, like milk from the cows that are fed on the alfalfa, dairy products and meat. They say these figures double if you include those indirect effects. I'll talk about bees first. Life cycle of a bee. They lay an egg, which turns into a larva, and then a pupa, and then the adult emerges. And as I said, honeybees are non-native. So they do compete with our native bumblebees, but they are important too. They provide, correct my numbers, feel free. But, the stats I found were they provide 19 billion a year in crop value, 150 to 230 million a year in honey sales, and other products and services like beeswax and honeybee rental. And you probably can't see it, but this truck is full of beehives. And if you could see it closer, there are all these tons of little black dots, and those are the bees. Those are beehives being trucked. People, farmers will rent these bees. They bring them to their farms and release them to pollinate their crops. They rent the bees. That's pretty cool.
Where are the honeybees from? Are they? You say they're not native to
Europe.
Europe.
And colony collapse disorder. My understanding is it's a combination of things. One really bad thing is the varroa mite. And there are other parasites, viruses and other diseases, pesticides, big one. Some beekeeping practices that just among certain individuals, and climate change. It's not like I think they were thinking in the beginning, one thing that was causing this collapse. It's a combination of several things. And I was reading that it sort of varies. You kind of heard about colony collapse, it was a big deal, and then you just kind of stopped hearing about it. And that's why I looked up an update, because I figured people might ask. It's like a regular thing. There are still losses, but not as bad as when it was first happening, and it just kind of fluctuates. They lose hives every year. It's a normal thing, but I guess back when it like hit the media and went crazy, it was a really bad year. But hasn't been a silver bullet or anything. And they're also vulnerable to sublethal stressors like fumes that, disorient them, pesticides that don't kill them but do damage, poor nutrition, and climate change. And our native bumblebees, I just think this is really cool. This is a pollen sac, or a pollen basket. As it collects the pollen, it just, I guess, slaps it to their legs and takes it back to them. Bumblebees are our most efficient pollinators because of buzz pollination. And I want to play a 30-second video clip. Buzz pollination is, and bumblebees are the only ones that do this. They go to the flower and they vibrate, and that shakes the pollen loose. Is there a way to get this screen to show up there? If I have to close this. Sorry, I had just like a 30-second YouTube clip of a bumblebee flying around and buzz pollinating. It's just so neat because you can hear it. I mean, they buzz when they fly, but when they land on a flower, they do this different buzz. If you've ever, next time you see a bumblebee, just watch and listen for a second. But it'll just go to the different flowers and it'll shake, and it shakes all that pollen loose. And as they go to the next flower, they do the same thing, and it distributes it better and collects more pollen from the flowers. But this makes them so efficient at pollination, because the more pollen you spread, the better. And the way they do it, well, you probably know, they transfer the pollen to the pistil of another flower, and each flower has so many ovules down here that will turn into seeds, and if all of those don't get pollinated, then it's not fully pollinated, and that is why you will see fruit like this. That means that all of those ovules didn't get pollinated, and this is full pollination. This didn't get fully pollinated, and that's very poorly pollinated. Also, like deformed apples, that's why. And I didn't know that until very recently. About a quarter of our bumblebees are endangered or vulnerable or near threatened. We just had one just less than a month ago officially listed as endangered, the rusty-patched bumblebee. And bumblebees nest in the ground. They use rodent burrows. They will go under thick grass thatch, brush piles, and other debris piles. This I have actually ever only seen one bumblebee nest, and this was it. I was walking down a road in one of our clear cuts in the forest, and this was a very steep bank along the road, and I saw all these holes and just started looking and found this bumblebee nest. There's a couple bumblebees coming out of it. 3. And then we've got tunnel nesting bees. Got a mason wasp and a carpenter bee there. They're both very docile, just like bumblebees. And what they do, this is kind of a close-up, but they will lay an egg. They'll either drill a hole or find one. And they'll go to the back and they'll lay an egg, deposit some pollen, and then seal it off, and then lay another egg, more pollen, seal it off until they get to the end. And of course, this is what the transformation inside. And the monarch. The life cycle of the monarch is just about like any other butterfly. They'll lay one egg at a time on the underneath side of a milkweed plant, and it will turn into a caterpillar, and there are 5 what they call instars. They hatch as a little tiny caterpillar, and they'll molt into a bigger one, and they'll do that 5 times, and then they will spin a chrysalis and then emerge as the adult. And the amazing thing about the monarch is their migration, their journey. I used to think that it was one butterfly, one monarch butterfly, that made that journey from Mexico up all, to Canada and back. It's not. It's multiple generations. They overwinter in Mexico, and then in the spring they'll start moving north, and they'll stop. They'll breed along the way, and they keep going up. And there'll be 3 or 4 generations that go, they'll go clear up into Canada. And it's that last generation that will fly. I mean, if they're clear up in Canada, some of them fly 3,000 miles back to their overwintering grounds in Mexico. And I mean, it takes them months. But that's pretty incredible for one butterfly. And there are 2 populations of monarchs. Ours, of course, and the largest one is the eastern population, but there's also a population in the west, and they overwinter in California and just a little bit into Mexico. And the monarchs must have milkweed. It can be any type of milkweed, but they have to have milkweed. That's the only thing that their caterpillars will eat. And like I said, it can be any kind. There's common milkweed, the beautiful orange butterfly milkweed, swamp milkweed, purple milkweed, poke milkweed, and there are others. But it can be any kind, but it has to be milkweed. And the, I forget the term, but that the milky stuff that is in the milkweed is, that's poisonous, and when they eat that, it prevents almost everything from consuming them. So, it protects them. Additional threats to monarchs include threats to their overwintering habitat. And these are both tree trunks, and these are trees completely covered in monarchs. They overwinter on a specific type of fir tree down in Mexico on, I believe it's just a handful, I want to say 12, but it may be less than that, mountaintops that have this fir tree. That is where they overwinter. So if that habitat disappears, I don't know that they could, go somewhere else. It's a major threat, because it's kind of very isolated. deforestation, and forest degradation, legal and illegal logging are threats to that overwintering habitat, land conversion and water diversion for farming, and extreme weather events. And that's from I think an ice storm they had down there that killed a bunch one year. And this is a visual of that overwintering habitat that I was talking about. That orange, those are monarchs. And right there is their disappearing habitat. Right into it. Current efforts in the United States to help the monarch include federal and state agencies. We are making big steps to help them. Things that we do, on our lands, practices like avoiding milkweed when we mow, education, we're doing a lot of good things. Nonprofit groups like the Xerxes Society for Invertebrate Conservation, partnerships. Two of the biggest are the Monarch, the Monarch Joint Venture and the Pollinator Partnership. It's federal, state, academia, NGOs, just everybody. And educated and concerned citizens like you and me. And I've got a brochure on it, there's the Monarch Larval, or Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, which I actually did last year and I'll do it this year too. It's citizen science, anybody can go out and do these surveys, and it goes into this big database that helps track the monarchs. This one actually tracks the caterpillars. And it's, it's pretty simple. You go out and just kind of do a transect and, look under the leaves of the milkweeds and note what you find, what stage the caterpillars are in. Pretty cool. And educated and concerned farmers, like I was saying, the whole GMO thing where they spray and wipe out all the weeds, that's not why they did it. It was an unintended effect, and now that they know, a lot of them are trying to help. Like areas on their farms that aren't of much use, they let it come back, or plant milkweed, have at least a little patch, something. Up here is a monarch that has been tagged. Yeah, I guess it can't be just a sticker. I don't know how they do it. But I guess if you find them dead, they want you to mail them back. And this one is from, it says, mail to Biology, University of Kansas, and gives the address. And so they kind of, can track how far, like where it came from, where it ends up. Because they know where they tag it, and where it ends up, they can tell how far that one went. And this is somebody out doing one of those larval studies. And I mentioned it goes through 5 different stages. You probably can't even see the first one. But they molt and get bigger each time. There have been efforts in Mexico too, as we all learn how amazing and how important this butterfly is. And ecotourism has become a big thing down there. They've established the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve, and non-governmental organizations are educating locals about the monarch and things they can do to help themselves that don't harm the monarch, like farming practices, conducting monarch counts, and lots of school groups down there. They are so into the monarch thing. They take the kids down there and they count monarchs, and they've really gotten into it down there, teaching the future generations about it, and who will hopefully continue to help and preserve. Bats, like I said, out west and especially in the tropics, they are huge pollinators. This one's pollinating a cactus. Tons of pollen. That's, I don't care what Mom says, they're cute. This is the agave plant, which is pretty much exclusively pollinated by, I want to say, the long-tongued bat. And over 500 tropical plants are pollinated by bats. Bananas, mangoes, peaches. Come on, it is cute. And there are some really, if you're not just blown away by nature, I don't, there are some just amazing relationships and adaptations in nature. I mentioned the bat and the agave plant. Without the fig wasp, we wouldn't have figs. The fig wasp is what pollinates the figs. The alfalfa cutter bee. As the alfalfa industry almost collapsed from lack of adequate pollination, and they tried honeybees, and I don't know, I don't have a diagram or a picture, but I read honeybees weren't as effective because there's some part of the plant that as they go to pollinate, it bonks them in the head, and so they don't like it. But the alfalfa cutter bee is perfectly adapted for the alfalfa. So the alfalfa cutter bee saved the alfalfa industry. Flies, most flowers produce this pleasant smell to attract pollinators. Flies are attracted to yucky stuff. So there's, you may have heard of the corpse flower and other flowers that do not smell good. But I say they do that because that drives me crazy when people do that because we don't know why, but it makes sense. These corpse flowers and other things that smell bad draw the flies, and the flies are the pollinators for those stinky plants that butterflies and bees don't like. And orchid wasps are adapted. That there are some orchids that look and even smell like female wasps to attract the male wasps. Here are a few of them. That is pretty amazing. Of course, they come and they're disappointed, but they've also but they get the pollen and there's something called a hawk moth that is adapted to the hawk moth orchid, and check out the tongue on that thing. And the bumblebees are the only pollinator that can pollinate the bottle gentian and the turtle head. And if you can see this flower is sort of closed up. That it doesn't open. That's what it does. It does not open, but only the bumblebee is strong enough to sort of pry it open enough to get down inside. And only the bumblebee can do that. Ways we can all help pollinators. First, do no harm. Do not use herbicides. If you have to, limit their use. Choose the appropriate type. Roundup kills everything. There are different pesticides for different things. Some that will kill, broadleaf. Some will kill grass. Some that will target, one thing specifically. Some of them last a long time in the soil. Some don't. There's just, it's really hard to choose, even if you looked into it. I just would avoid them if you can. And if you're gonna use them, you know, please avoid the neonicotinoids and other systemic pesticides. And I have, when we're done, all these handouts are for you. I've got some books up here. You're welcome to look through. Some of them might tickle your fancy. But I've got several handouts on the the pesticides, and many of them are on the neonicotinoids. This one is on neonicotinoids. It lists a bunch of the brand names you're going to find in Lowe's if you want to avoid them. This has a list. There are 5 chemical names that are neonicotinoids, but you know, this is the list of, you know, ortho, you know, whatever, all-in-one rose and flower care. This one right here. This, you know, this I'm sure came from Lowe's or Walmart. It's one you find on all the shelves. And right here, imidacloprid. And it also says, I think right on the front, that it's systemic. You know, it's marketed like it's a good thing, and this is what you want. But it's not, because it not only kills whatever pest you're targeting, but it kills everything else. But if you, this is a list of the neonicotinoids.
Is there a list of good ones or less bad ones?
Ones that aren't on this list. I actually tried to do that, and I don't know how I could. The thing, if you want to take one of these lists, and like I said, there are 5 chemicals like that imidacloprid. If you pick up something you think might be okay, what I would do is look at the ingredients, because I mean this one right here says imidacloprid, so you know that's a really bad one. If you see the word systemic, that's not good either. 3 systemic products in one. Fertilizer, feeds and renews, insect control, including your pollinators, and disease control. So the best thing I would know to do is, just make sure it's not on this list. And if I have only used herbicides on my property personally once. Well, I've had to do it several times. I had black-eyed Susans, which I love, but there was one sprig one year. Oh, how pretty! I'll leave them. Well, the next year they exploded and into my flower garden right by my pond. And I mean, they were taking over. So what I did, I do not like the whole spraying. I'm okay with targeted herbicide. Like for trees, they have something called hack and squirt. You basically, you hack into the tree and spray directly into that cut. You're not, just broadcasting it everywhere. But the black-eyed Susans, I hated to, but they were going to completely take over, and the leaves were already popping up everywhere in my flowers. So what I did, and I don't know whether I should tell you to do this, I put gloves on, and because I didn't want to kill my flowers, and I sprayed my glove and carefully, took the leaf and rubbed it on the leaf, and it worked. It worked. It did. I mean, you'll see those shriveling up, but my flowers were okay. And, they're still popping up, so just here and there, I'd have to do the same thing because it goes to the root, but apparently, they spread before I can get them all. I've almost got them all, but they were going to completely take over. I mean, they were all down my sidewalk and everything. And another thing, I did it when when it was dry and there was no threat of rain for at least a day, because what you don't want to do is spray it and then have the rain come and wash it off into the soil and kill your flowers or things you don't want killed. So make sure it's not going to rain for at least a day. Read the label. This one that I chose also was supposedly good for, or safe for around the water. It never got into my pond, but I have a pond there, and just in case. Of course, I was worried about my amphibians, not so much fish, but the only thing you're going to find on a label, if you even find anything about wildlife, is going to be fish. So, I was concerned about amphibians, and I didn't see anything about that, but I was just extremely careful applying it. Be precise and careful when applying. And if you're going to do it, apply when pollinators are not or are less active, at least. And be aware that multiple applications may be necessary for certain plants. Please don't kill non-aggressive bees. I will also say this, again, ironically, yesterday, or day before yesterday, second time, and it kills me, but it's the second time ever that I've killed bees. The first was yellow jackets that were, in the yard. They're, if they're out in the woods, I say leave them alone, but, if they're your house and they're stinging you, and, well, same with snakes. If they're not at your house, they're not bothering you, leave them be, leave them alone. But I got nailed by some hornets. I have a walking path through my field, and they were up in, I have a bird feeding post, which there's no food, and I've got a raccoon baffle, and they were up in there, so we could, we can't walk. My neighbor and I walk our dogs, and we couldn't decide. I hit those. I hate you. They're all bees are good, but so many are non-aggressive, and I was out with my supervisor collecting some scarlet bee balm seeds, and we just stopped. There were all these bees and flies all over. There was some Joe Pye milkweed and whatever these yellow flowers are. They were just buzzing everywhere. We just stopped and enjoyed it. And I said, Kim, touch that bumblebee. So I want to take a picture, just to show people how actually passive they are. All the bumblebee pictures you've seen I took, and I actually accidentally touched a couple of them, as I was taking the picture. They don't care, and they're all over my bushes. That I walk right past them on the sidewalk. They just go about their business. They don't bother you. They don't care. They just go about their pollination and just don't care. And yeah, he actually touching that bumblebee, and it didn't care. Carpenter bees, although I know you don't like them drilling into your houses, but they're not aggressive. And I will bring up something that might help with that. And mason wasps. This is actually at my house, and I didn't know what that was. I took a picture and looked it up, and they're non-aggressive too. Same thing, they were kind of flying around, and I'd come and go, and they wouldn't bother me. And please do not use red hummingbird food. For one, the red color is absolutely unnecessary. Natural nectar is clear. It's unnecessary, and it makes them sick and can even kill them. The red dye that's in it, and it just goes through me when I walk down the aisle and see it on the shelf. I just want to grab it all and throw it in the But as you can see, do you have a question? You can go ahead and ask. It doesn't bother me.
Speaking of hummingbirds, how do you keep bees off a hummingbird feeder?
I don't know that you can. Does it keep the hummingbirds, I mean, are there so many it keeps the hummingbirds away? Yeah, my neighbor has one, the bees are all over one but not the other. Do you have more than one out? I don't know about that. 'Cause they're drawn to it too. Yeah, ants. I've got 5 feeders and the ants are horrible on one of them, but not the
They
others.
just dig it in there. Even the great big carpenter ants get
Yeah.
inside of them.
Now, my hummingbirds seem to still eat, but still, yeah, you don't want the ants. They're inside and then they die in there and get, make it gross.
I use those, what they call moats, that
Do
you
they-
put above, that works to keep the ants out. You put the
one
moat
you keep
above
above.
the feeder, and if they're climbing up a pole, they come to that water and they can't get past it.
Yeah. Where did you get those?
Yeah,
Like,
but now not the hummingbird food.
Loaves.
You can buy
Yeah.
feeders at the moat building.
But just plain type
Or you can
Yeah.
buy one
Yeah.
that goes between the feeder and the hook.
do you think the built-in works? Because I
Yeah.
just tried. Okay.
Ours do.
I still had a few after I filled that with water, but it wasn't as bad.
The wind blows the water out, so, you know, but if it's windy sometimes it gets, and so it's not very deep.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to check it all the time.
Yeah.
Recipe for hummingbird food?
Yeah.
Okay.
As you can see, this is just a picture I pulled off the internet. But as you can see, this is not all that normal, them getting along, that well. But feeders, and the nectar, which you can't even really see, but they find it just fine. I mean, the feeder being red helps, but the nectar itself, does not need to be red and shouldn't be. And it's so easy and cheaper to make your own food. Some people don't bring it to a boil. I read that you should do that because it kills bacteria and lasts longer. But even if you don't boil it, you just mix 1 part sugar to 4 parts water. Like I said, it is best to boil it and let it cool. They love it. They go nuts over it. And I mean, it's quick, it's easy, it's cheaper. I don't know how much that stuff costs that you get in the stores, but quick and easy. Along with the do no harm, if you don't hay and you have a field that you just let grow, don't mow until very late fall, even early winter, until all of the flowers, and especially milkweed, is gone or dead. That way, you're not, the worst thing you can do, and it happens where I live, it makes me sick. There are people that hay up there, and the worst thing I think you can do is let that milkweed grow, and the monarchs come in and, breed, and then you come and kill them all. So that's, and if you wait until later to mow, you're also helping ground nesting birds, fawns that are hiding in the grass, and that's a little bunch. Other critters that, hide in there, snakes. Or mow consistently, like you do your lawn, so that milkweed and the other flowers don't become established. Like I said, it's especially important for milkweed. Plant only native flowers. Our native pollinators are adapted to native flowers. They're more efficient because they're adapted to them. They will use non-native floral resources, but they're not as efficient, and they're not quite as useful. They're adapted to the native flowers. In your gardens, if you have a favorite butterfly, find out what its host plant or plants are, what their caterpillars feed on, and plant that. Have a variety of bloom colors, bloom shapes. You know, some bees have long tongues, some have short. I don't know how long beetles' tongues are. I don't imagine they're too long. Then you've got hummingbirds. So a good variety of bloom shapes is important. And probably most important of all, have a variety of bloom times. You want, best would be, you know, a few species that are blooming in the spring, and then, you know, they may persist or they'll die out. And then other species that are blooming in the summer, others that are blooming in the fall, so that the pollinators have something year-long to feed on. Especially if you can get the very early spring and very late fall, you know, as they're just emerging and just, you know, going in for, well, those that live. But you want flowers that are blooming all year long. Plant in clumps if you can. It helps, you know, a large clump of, say, you know, yellow, they're gonna find, you know, better than, you know, a few single flowers. I probably shouldn't officially be saying this, but avoid the big box stores, Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart. Unless it has changed, the flowers and seeds that they're selling are basically poison. They're treating them with the neonicotinoids. And just 2 years ago, I bought some butterfly milkweed seeds from Lowe's, you know, in one of those little packets. And they were, I took them out, and I thought, what is this? They were little blue pellets. They were coated with a neonicotinoid, and of course it was marketed as a good thing. You know, this helps them grow and protects them from pests, but they were poison. And they sell, they're selling flowers that have systemic poisons in them. I'm hoping that has changed or will change, but you know, the public doesn't know that. I didn't really know until an email was sent around to folks. I don't know who it came from, but it was in one of those stores, and said that, I mean, it's right on the tag, and this is why they, you know, went nuts. It's right on this tag, on this, it was some kind of milkweed. You know, this is treated with a neonicotinoid, like that's a good thing. And of course, this person knew better and just went nuts, and hopefully something, you know, will be done about it, because, you know, people don't know that that's what it is or that it's a bad thing. So what I would recommend, and again, if this goes on the internet, I'm going to get in trouble. I would buy from either seeds or plants that are from sellers that, I mean, just ask them, are these treated with neonicotinoids or other pesticides? I've got a couple catalogs up here from companies that I use through the Forest Service. I would also recommend a local, well, he used to be in Hinton, he's now in Floyd, Virginia. He specializes in Appalachian and rare flowers. And we've bought his stuff before, and it's at least 2 years old. I mean, they come, you know, they're pretty big, and when you plant them, they bloom because they're mature already. They're nice plants. He doesn't treat his, and they're you know, native to this area. His plants are great.
What's the name on
Whose
it?
plants are great?
Wood thrush natives. And actually, I've got a slide on this seed company I want to tell you about. This seed company, one of them that I use is Roundstone Native Seeds. And they, through the internet, but they sell, they also have like mixes, they'll have pollinator mixes adapted to your area. There's also Ernst, E-R-N-S-T, another seed company that we use quite a bit. And I don't know, the local nurseries, I'd like to call around a few of those and see, because I don't know if they treat them with any, I would hope not, but I don't know. I would just, ask wherever you like to buy flowers, I would just ask. And if you can, avoid cultivars, hybrids, and double blooms. Double blooms have no use to pollinators. They don't produce nectar or pollen. They're of no use. They're pretty, for us to look at, but they don't have any use for pollinators. Be messy. I hate the word weed. Weeds are what pollinators need. Weeds are good. The weeds along the road that they mow, those are flowers. They're good for pollinators. In your gardens, around your houses, leave messy areas. Leaves, brush, logs. These will be habitat, refuge, and even nesting areas for pollinators, and it's less work for you. Leave areas of loose or sandy bare ground, and like rodent holes, just leave those. Bumblebees will use them. Create small, moist, or muddy areas for butterfly puddling. And if this is a bunch of tiger swallowtails, the ground was moist, and what this puddling is, and it's the same if you've ever seen them on animal droppings. It's the same thing. What they're doing is getting minerals and nutrients from the soil or the animal scat. They're getting nutrients from that. Here's one that just somebody made. Just a little area, and you just have to keep it moist. You've got mud puddles, that's just as good. I don't know if you can see the different shades of green, but that's my lawn. This is the second year I've started leaving thick patches of clover. Oh, the bumblebees love it. So, go ahead and laugh. I've got you doing the same thing.
Yes, you do.
I mean, the bumblebees are just all over it, and plus I have a rabbit now that likes it. But I mean, these thick patches, I just mow around them, and the bumblebees are happy. You can make artificial nesting for, tunnel nesters and other pollinators. This is one that I actually bought from a catalog a few years ago, and I don't know if you can see, it's sort of green. Some of the holes are plugged. I think, pretty sure that was my mason wasp using that, but they did use it. They sealed it off, and then I started kind of learning how to make my own and kind of going nuts from there. You can see. This is one I got just off the internet, a neat thing that somebody made. This is one this isn't just for tunnel nesters, sort of like that tall one is. You've got the wood for the tunnel nesters, but also pine cones, grass, and sticks and other things that other pollinators use. And this is a huge one I found on the internet. Somebody's went nuts. And I want to go back one slide. The most importantly, well, two things. Use untreated wood. Those chemicals that in the treated wood, that's not good for the pollinators. Use untreated wood, and don't use cedar. It's rot resistant, but it repels insects. So be sure to use untreated wood if you make your own. And also, this one, I just want to say they should have, when you make these ones that you drill the holes in, or if you use the reeds, have a variety of sizes, not just one, because you've got pretty big carpenter bees and those skinnier mason wasps, and you've got others. So have a variety of hole openings. And, well, feel free to come up and look at these. I made these two. Actually, these are going to go at our nature center. I used reeds, a block of wood, and you can see I have different size holes, pine cones, and actually the sawdust that came out of all these holes is behind these pine cones. I just left that in there. Grass and just bark, and it's pretty cool. The slice, pulled the rotten stuff out and stuffed it with reeds. And I put a back on it because I don't know if they would, if these are just open, I don't know if they would seal the back and use it. I don't know, so I just put a back on it. But that's just something I came up with. You can also make artificial nests for bumblebees and put them in the ground. Forest Service efforts, we do some non-native invasive plant removal and control. They do garlic mustard hand pulls. They do some spraying for Japanese stilt grass, which in my opinion is just a lost cause. It's so invasive, and I mean, we've got somebody that's been spraying the same road forever, and it takes, I remember when I was in one of the herbicide classes, they said it can take, I mean, at least a decade to get rid of it and you can't miss a year, because once it seeds, then, those seeds, you can kill, even if you get every stick of what's there are seeds in the ground, and they're gonna keep coming up, and you've got to kill that, and more seeds are gonna come up until that seed bank is gone. That's why it's so hard to get rid of. Education, development of private apiary guidelines. Well, the Forest Service is just now sort of looking into this. The Xerxes Society just came up with some guidelines or recommendations. We've had some requests on the Forest Service to put beehives, honey beehives, and folks are asking around, is this okay? Should we do this? And the guidelines basically are saying allow it, but keep the apiaries at least, I believe it's 4 miles away from any sensitive native bumblebee populations, like the rusty patch bumblebee. If you've got one here, don't put any around that. Keep them away, because they compete. There's just guidelines so far. We do collect native seed and are starting a program to grow it. I've been growing some myself. We're starting to include a few native wildflower seeds in our reclamation practices. Log landings and road work, they just, normally they'll just throw, I think it's rye and just some grasses that are quick to grow and do erosion control. And, I kept saying, hey, throw some wildflowers in there too, just while you're at it, to save me from going back and doing it like I have been. Just, throw some wildflower seeds in there, get it established. Not enough to reduce your erosion control, but just throw some in there, and we've sort of gotten that started. We avoid milkweed when we mow, and at least the DNR on our district does as well. They're our state partner. Establishment of pollinator gardens and establishment of native wildflowers and forest openings, which is what I've really been working Seeding, this is my man Carl Willie on the tractor, plowing an area up for me. This is Lanty rolling it because two of the most important things are seed to soil contact. That seed has to contact the soil well for it to germinate. So that's why we till up the soil and then sort of compact it the best we can so that, you know, the seeds are flat. And then we actually roll it again. And this roller, because this land that we were in, it was pretty wet and big clods of dirt or soil. So the roller really wasn't doing anything, so Carl just started rolling over it, and that worked pretty well. Probably can't see that, but that's just some of the seeds smashed into the soil, and some of them sprouting. We also do some planting. This is a little greenhouse that I bought, and it's at my house, and this is the second year I've done my best. I have some failures and some successes. This is this year's success. This is swamp milkweed that I'm going to be planting with our Youth Conservation Corps on Friday. These are some of the plants from Wood Thrush Nursery. And I mean, these, I think you can see the white blooms on the foxglove beard tongue that were already blooming. This is last year's Youth Conservation Corps, YCC, and they were planting the wood thrush plants. We tilled it up, and then we planted the plants, and then I also, you know, threw some seeds afterwards. And this is the before, and the plants, if you can see them, they're sort of wilty. They did not look good when we first planted them. This is just later that year. And, you know, there's some scarlet bee balm, partridge pea, cone flowers. Not everything, you know, is blooming at once, but that's good. The New England asters, they come up in the fall. And this is, that's one of the, well, that's the second area we planted later that year. And here are the New England asters, and other, let's see, partridge pea. I think there are some other daisies, several things in there, but that made me feel good. That's pretty nice. And that's what I mean, my big focus right now are planting these areas. I feel like I've forgotten something, but. Don't worry.
I have a question. Is the Joe Pye weed a form of milkweed?
No, but it is good for pollinators. But yeah, no, it's not a milkweed, but it is a good one for pollinators.
Because you see that so often in August.
Yeah, it's a good one for pollinators.
Thank you.
Well, all the things that we spray on our plants to keep the deer away hurt the pollinators. All the stuff that we spray, you know, that deer fence and all that kind of stuff, will that hurt the pollinators?
I sure hope not, because I use it myself. You know, I'm going to go home and read the label. I was okay with it because it doesn't hurt plants or wildlife. I saw that and I said, okay, I'm going to try that, and it worked. So pollinators specifically, I don't think so, because the main ingredient, I believe, is garlic, which is natural. And yeah, it works, but on application, you don't want to go outside for a while.
And this has nothing to really to do with pollinators, but what service, what good does a hornet do? Besides, when they sting you, they hurt like crazy. What do they do?
I believe they are pollinators, but aside from that, I don't know.
I just want to because like I said, you don't see too many hornet nests anymore. There's a lot of things you just don't see that, like when I was a child growing up, that you used to see. So I just point, sweat bees. What, you used to have sweat bees. Then what good do they do for anything besides sting you, you know?
Yeah, they're pollinators too.
They're all pollinators.
I think yellow jackets are too.
When in doubt.
I saw one the other day, it's the first one that I had seen.
I rise to the defense of my poor immigrant honeybees. I just want to explain to you why the second generation of Europeans, and of course we're all immigrants too, remember, just like the honeybees they brought, why they brought them. It's because the first generation starved to death because the local pollinators don't pollinate the fruit trees and the garden vegetables and things they brought in. Honeybees are the only pollinator that's what's called flower constant. That is to say, a normal pollinator, one of the native pollinators, will go from a coneflower to a poplar tree, to an apple tree, to a pear tree. So it doesn't do much good to the new plants to get the pollen from a plant that's not theirs. A honeybee will go to the flower that has the highest percentage of sugar in the nectar. That's a pear tree to start off with, 12% sugar. And it will only go to pear tree blossoms. So it takes the pollen from one to another, to another, to another, to another, until the apple trees bloom at 24% sugar. Then it switches to apple and never goes back to the pear. That's why the pear is early, because there's nothing else. But it only goes to those. And I have had people, when I give this talk, say that if only human males were as flower constant as bees, we wouldn't have So the second generation brought the honeybees over with them from Europe because it's the only way that they could make enough food for them to survive.
So instead of going from a coneflower and taking that pollen to
A pear tree.
Doesn't
do any good.
Yeah, it's going to waste.
And bumblebees are wonderful, and this vibration stuff is fantastic, but it only works if that flower can self-pollinate, which is a really small percentage of fruits. Most of them need pollination that's cross-pollination, and that's what the honeybee does. It brings the apple pollen to another apple tree, to another apple tree, and so it just tends to work better in the ecosystem. Now, of course, a lot of the trees they brought over, the fruit trees and the vegetables and things, those weren't native either, which is why they had to bring the pollinators back from Europe, and that's how come they did. So anyway, and you're right about California. There's 2.5 million honeybee hives in America, and 1.5 million of them get on trucks and go to California for the almonds from December, January, February every year. It's enormous. But this is what caused colony collapse disorder, because if you took more than half of the kids in America and put them in one place for 3 months, if one of those kids had the mumps, when they came back, all those kids had the mumps. And then they brought the mumps back to every state when those hives came back. So that's what really caused the big problems. It's just awful. But there's so much money in it that you can't stop them from doing it.
Well, they're also talking about, and hoping they don't do this, that doing the same thing, hiring bumblebees, but the big problem with that, I think it was the Xerxes Society's like, oh, please don't do this. Just what you said, diseases. You ship them somewhere, ship them back, they're diseased. You ship them somewhere else, you're shipping the disease.
Yeah. The only one that actually works as well as the honeybee is that blue mason bee that you're doing there. They also will go to just blueberries, blueberries, blueberries. So they're really trying to hope that maybe they'll be a native pollinator that'll work out for us if they can just get a ways to figure out what you're doing. Anyway, it was just a lovely talk, and I really thank you for getting into this.
Thank you very much.